Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today I'm reviewing the Gigabyte M27Q2 QD, another mainstream 1440p gaming monitor from Gigabyte's popular M27Q series. This one has a 27-inch IPS LCD with a maximum refresh rate of 210Hz, along with a quantum dot enhanced panel, hence the QD in the name. Gigabyte are going for a balanced approach between image quality and speed without breaking the bank, as I'm expecting this display to launch for around $260 US. This should make it one of the cheapest 1440p monitors with a refresh rate above 200Hz. A couple of weeks ago, I checked out the M27Q3, which is also expected to debut at a similar price. So what are the main differences? Well, the M27Q3 is a 320Hz monitor, so it has a higher refresh rate, but it uses a different IPS LCD panel without the quantum dot layer, so its color gamut is not as wide. Gigabyte are giving buyers the option here between the pure speed of the M27Q3 or the more balanced approach of the M27Q2 QD. So I'm curious to see whether there's one true standout at the end of the day. Gigabyte's M series has received a new design for 2025, and this also applies to LCDs like the M27Q2. The wide V-shaped base has been replaced with a small, thin, six-sided metal plate. The smaller footprint occupies less desk space, so you can use a broader range of keyboard orientations with this monitor. And the flat profile means you can put things on top of the base, further maximizing usable space. The stand pillar is a metal tube with a relatively small diameter, but again, it's very sturdy and still allows for a wide range of ergonomic adjustment, including height, tilt, swivel, and pivot. The maximum height on offer is acceptable without being outstanding. I think the whole stand assembly, the base, the pillar, and everything looks excellent, and this is a big upgrade on previous Gigabyte monitors. The display section is dominated by the LCD panel on the front with a chin along the bottom edge, including a large Gigabyte logo. The rear is made of black plastic and features a boxy design similar to what you see on OLEDs, but a bit thicker to accommodate the larger LCD screen. Gigabyte's design uses a range of different lines and vents and stuff, which looks fine enough. There's no RGB LED lighting here. For ports, we're getting one DisplayPort and two HDMI ports, along with a USB-C port supporting DP Alt mode and 18 watts of power delivery. Paired with these display inputs is a 2-port USB 5 gigabits per second hub and an audio jack. What's interesting about these ports is the specification and bandwidth used. The DisplayPort is listed as 1.4 spec, but it's using an HBR2 bandwidth configuration with DSC, instead of the highest HBR3 configuration that DP 1.4 allows. HBR2 is DisplayPort 1.2 class, however DSC is not supported over DP 1.2, so it is technically DP 1.4, just an unusual configuration for this resolution and refresh. On top of this, the HDMI ports are just 2.0 spec instead of 2.1. If all that spec talk is confusing, here's what matters. The weird DisplayPort configuration doesn't have any real impact on the experience other than DSC is used, which has no visual impact. You can still use the screen at up to 10-bit 1440p 210Hz over DisplayPort. The HDMI configuration, on the other hand, limits you to just 144Hz at 8-bit 1440p, so you can't access the maximum refresh rate over HDMI. This port should be HDMI 2.1 with higher bandwidth. However, the HDMI port still supports a downscaled 4K 60Hz mode, which could be useful for console gamers. The OSD on this monitor is controlled through a directional toggle and includes lots of features like separate display modes, lots of gaming-specific features like crosshairs, shadow boosting, FPS counters, and other information readouts. It's a fast and easy-to-navigate interface, which is always nice to see. The M27Q2 uses a matte screen coating, which is standard for IPS LCDs and continues to be the best choice for this technology in 2025. It does a decent job of diffusing light and preventing direct reflections, and the level of grain is standard, so clarity is still pretty good. Motion performance is next up, and before I look at response times, I should quickly note that the 210Hz refresh rate is accessed through an overclock setting in the OSD, which you'll need to enable manually. By default, this is a 200Hz monitor, which makes the whole overclock thing seem pretty pointless, as all it gives you is 10 extra hertz. Really, this should just come as 210Hz out of the box. Sometimes manufacturers use this overclock system to get away with shipping dodgy units to customers that can't properly achieve the overclocked refresh rate while still being able to advertise this highest refresh. I'm not saying that's what Gigabyte are doing here, and the vast majority of the time you'll have no issues using the 210Hz mode, but if your unit doesn't work at 210Hz for whatever reason, you should RMA it. You wouldn't accept a factory overclocked graphics card that doesn't work at the OC clock speeds listed on the website, and you shouldn't with a monitor either. Okay, let's get into the response times. 5 overdrive settings like most Gigabyte monitors, and the first up is off at 210Hz, which gives us a look at native panel performance. Not the fastest panel with a 12 millisecond average response time and no overshoot, so let's check out the other configurations. The picture quality mode is an improvement to 8.5 milliseconds, but we're still not getting the sorts of speed needed for a 210Hz refresh rate. Balance is a lot better. Here we see a 6 millisecond average response, good refresh rate compliance, still very little overshoot, and good cumulative deviation. Increasing the overdrive setting to the speed mode pushes the panel too far, and now we see lots of inverse ghosting artifacts. There's also the Smart OD setting, which takes what we see using the bounce mode and applies variable overdrive to the mix. This is the best setting to use for all refresh rates. At 210Hz, it's still offering around 6 milliseconds, which is fine enough, and this is maintained as we move down to 165, 144, and 120Hz. So all of those refreshes are very usable with minimal overshoot. Below this, the variable overdrive system dials things back nicely, so the panel does get a bit slower, as low as 8 milliseconds at 60Hz, but inverse ghosting and overshoot is never really a problem. Without variable overdrive, if 6 millisecond response times were maintained all the way down to 60Hz, we'd see many more artifacts, so despite getting slower, this is the best way to tune this sort of panel. What we end up with is a well-tuned monitor that offers a single overdrive mode experience. You can set and forget the Smart OD setting and enjoy gaming with variable refresh enabled. At 210Hz, the M27Q2 offers a typical IPS LCD level of response time speed. 6 milliseconds with no overshoot is a middle of the chart result, better than some of the low-cost IPS units I've tested, like the MSI 275QF and ASRock PG27QFT2A. It's a little slower than the G274QPF-QD, but with much less overshoot. The biggest difference you'll see is to something like the M27Q3 or Asus XG27ACS, which offers a similar overshoot experience but at a faster refresh rate. And this is seen when looking at cumulative deviation, which better measures the balance between speed and overshoot. Among these sorts of monitors, the M27Q2 sits in a very good position, similar to MSI's QD-enhanced G274QPF and previous high-refresh Gigabyte models like the M27QX. However, the M27Q3 is clearly the faster display, producing a 36% better result here. On average across the refresh range, the M27Q2 also sits in a decent mid-table position, offering a solid response time experience with no real overshoot concerns. It's not the best performing product I've tested, but it's pretty good, and again outperforms the G274QPF-QD, the M27QP, and ends up close to the M27QA. When we look at cumulative deviation, it's a similar story. The M27Q2 puts up a good result that's in line with other IPS LCDs. This result is only 9% better than the G274QPF-QD, so that's unlikely to be noticeable in practice, but the M27Q2 has a single overdrive mode experience, while the MSI does not, so this chart doesn't always show the full context. The M27Q3 though, again, it's ahead by 22%, so the 320Hz panel used in that model does appear to be faster overall. At a fixed 120Hz refresh rate, the M27Q2 performs well, again middle of the chart like we've seen in other results, and similar can be said at 60Hz. So there's a wide range of refresh rates where this display offers competitive performance. Gigabyte offer backlight strobing through their aim stabilizer sync technology, which works both with and without adaptive sync enabled. However, there are no other settings, so you can't control strobe timing or length, and brightness is locked. It works down to a refresh rate of 120Hz. When using aim stabilizer sync with VRR enabled, there is an improvement in clarity at 210Hz, but when dropping down to the middle part of the refresh range, like at say 110Hz, it's much blurrier and not a significant improvement in clarity. On the other hand, if you disable VRR, the clarity of aim stabilizer improves at 210Hz, and if you drop to a fixed refresh rate like 120Hz, it retains good clarity. So typically, the best way to use this feature is to disable adaptive sync. One of the benefits to using a quantum dot layer is the lack of red fringing when using backlight strobing, so in some ways, this feature is better on the M27Q2 QD than on the M27Q3, which has red fringing issues. However, on the flip side, the M27Q2 has more strobe crosstalk, so it's easier to see the double image effect. Neither option offers the perfect clarity of the best strobe monitors. Input lag is great with a processing delay of just 0.5 milliseconds. The 210Hz refresh rate gives this screen a small advantage in latency over 180 and 165Hz monitors, sitting in a middle ground position between 180 and 240Hz. I wouldn't say it's a huge improvement over 165Hz, but at a 27% higher refresh, it is nicer to use and has more headroom for gaming. Similarly, I wouldn't say it's a huge downgrade from 240Hz. The M27Q3 though does take things to another level with lower latency from a 52% higher refresh rate, so the Q3 variant is better for competitive gamers. Power consumption is low at 19 watts for a 200 nit image. This is among the most efficient 1440p panels of this size, and you can see here a pretty sizable gap to the M27Q3, showing how different the panel technology is. The big selling point to the M27Q2 QD is its color gamut. Gigabyte described this display as having OLED-like vibrant colors with a similar color space to 4th Gen WOLED. This is certainly true from a color space standpoint, as the monitor reports in with 99% coverage of DCI-P3 and 83% coverage of Rec 2020. This puts it neck and neck with the M27Q28G, which uses a 4th Gen WOLED panel, and other IPS LCDs with quantum dot layers. Gigabyte's last gen IPS display sat around the 75% mark, as does the M27Q3, so it's a definite improvement. I'd temper my expectations around OLED-like vibrant colors though, because the vibrance of OLED is a combination of its color gamut and contrast. The M27Q2 certainly looks good, and its wide gamut provides a high level of saturation out of the box, in line with what you'd see from an OLED. It just doesn't have the black depth to go with it. Default out-of-the-box calibration is underwhelming, the gamma is a little high and the color temperature slightly too warm, leading to a below-average grayscale delta E. And while the color gamut is certainly impressive, SDR content only requires sRGB or Rec 709 for the most part, which leads to noticeable oversaturation in the default mode. When viewing YouTube videos, for example, skin tones can look a bit too red. Compared to other monitors, the results are below average in calibration. The M27Q3 is more accurate out of the box, but also not especially impressive. There's a couple of ways to improve performance in the SDR mode. One is to enable Windows 11 Auto Color Management, which uses information the display reports to emulate sRGB at the OS level. This reduces oversaturation and improves color results, though it doesn't impact grayscale numbers. It's a good choice to use because it doesn't lock any of the OSD settings, but the results are still only mediocre in this configuration. The sRGB mode is better, but still falls short of proper factory calibration. In this mode, the white balance is similar to the default mode, and gamma is somewhat improved, but still on the high side. Gamut emulation is good, so oversaturation is eliminated, but the grayscale results prevent this mode from achieving better color checker numbers. Compared to other monitors, sRGB mode grayscale is average, offering similar results to the M27Q3 and G274QPF-QD. Color checker results are below average. Both of these new M27Q series displays seem to offer a similar experience here, which is a downgrade on earlier variants like the M27QP. Calibration can be improved through a full software ICC profile, which I created using Calman. The results here are very good thanks to a wide color gamut and decent factory gamma performance, so this is a great candidate for calibration like this. Maximum brightness is on the lower side for a modern LCD monitor at 357 nits, but this isn't that unusual compared to results for the M27QA and 275QF. If brightness is a concern for you, the M27Q3 is brighter, as are monitors like the G274QPF-QD and Q27G40XMN. Minimum brightness is good at 44 nits. The native contrast ratio of this panel was a surprise. 1705:1 is one of the best results I've seen from an IPS LCD, getting close to LG's IPS black technology. The M27QA was also a great monitor for contrast, much better than the M27QP or G274QPF-QD, but this new M27Q2 is even better. It's a 35% higher result than the M27Q3, so this combined with the wide color gamut is certainly a possible reason to prefer the M27Q2 over the higher refresh rate model. With that said, overall contrast is still mediocre compared to a VA LCD or OLED. Viewing angles on the M27Q2 are pretty good, standard sort of thing for an IPS LCD. You should have no issue using this screen at normal angles. Uniformity is average, the center section of the panel is okay, but there was some fall off along the left and right edges compared to the center. This is most noticeable in desktop apps with uniform backgrounds, but is less visible while gaming. In the Essentials checklist, Gigabyte generally do an okay job of advertising this display, getting specifications around brightness and contrast correct. Their big misstep is advertising this as HDR capable with Display HDR 400 certification. While it's technically true that the M27Q2 QD can accept an HDR input signal, the panel lacks local dimming, so it can't display HDR content properly thanks to terrible contrast figures and poor brightness. You should not purchase this display for HDR. The name M27Q2 QD is mediocre. Adding the QD to the end is clumsy and seems unnecessary. This display really should just be called the M27Q2. There's also the issue of there now being tons of M27Q variant monitors, so it's less straightforward than it once was to purchase one of these products. The feature support matrix is a typical showing for an SDR LCD. Gigabyte miss on many of the HDR related features despite advertising HDR support, but we do get things like backlight strobing, a KVM switch, and a USB-C input. Overall, the Gigabyte M27Q2 QD is a very competent 1440p gaming monitor that iterates on its predecessors with small, though beneficial improvements. Instead of being 180Hz like we've seen in this category previously, the M27Q2 is now 210Hz. Instead of using a regular backlight, we're now getting a quantum dot layer, which isn't a never-seen-before feature, but does add to the overall package, and the contrast ratio is very good for IPS LCD technology. In many ways, this is one of Gigabyte's most refined mainstream monitors. Variable overdrive has been implemented properly to deliver very solid motion performance, both at 210Hz and across the variable refresh rate range. There's a single overdrive mode experience, good response time tuning, and low input lag, combined with a refresh rate that sits between previous mainstream models and faster 240Hz products. The quantum dot layer isn't essential for a display that doesn't support HDR in any meaningful way, but it does provide a very wide color gamut and allows for high levels of saturation, if that's your sort of thing. To me, the more impressive aspect is the contrast ratio, which is well above the usual 1000:1 we see from IPS LCDs, though it still falls short of other technologies. Unfortunately, calibration is just average at best here, though this can be improved through tweaks. I also quite like the design with a height-adjustable stand, flat metal base, and decent aesthetics. The inclusion of a USB-C port and KVM switch elevates this monitor above the entry-level tier to compete with more premium 1440p offerings. Whether or not this product is worth recommending hinges entirely on the price point, and I think in a lot of regions, it's going to be in a weird position. In Australia, I've been told the M27Q2 QD has a regular price of 450 Australian dollars, which is just $10 less than the M27Q3 at $460. I don't have a US MSRP for the M27Q2 yet, but I do know the M27Q3 is $270 US, so I would assume the M27Q2 is going to be just slightly cheaper than that, maybe $260 or thereabouts. I also know Gigabyte have launched both models at a promotional price of $360 Australian, which is around $220 US, perhaps a look at where both monitors will sit during sales or longer term. So first up, should you buy the M27Q2 QD or the M27Q3 at a similar price? Well, if motion clarity is your thing, the Q3 model is faster, both in terms of maximum refresh rate, 320 versus 210Hz, and response times at the same refresh rate. It also has lower input lag and is still decent in terms of colors. It's the better option if you like faster paced games and competitive shooters. The Q2 QD has a better contrast ratio, wider color gamut, and better viewing angles, so it typically looks better at the expense of reduced, though still good motion performance. There's no obvious choice, though I tend to think the M27Q3 is the better package because of how affordable it is for a 300Hz display. What about compared to the rest of the 1440p offerings on the market today? This is where things get tricky. 27-inch 1440p 180Hz IPS monitors start at around $160 to $170 US these days, for products like the MSI 275QF. The M27Q2 is categorically the better monitor. Wider color gamut, higher contrast, faster, higher refresh rate, better design, but it could be 60% more expensive, which is a huge margin. In Australia, that's exactly where it sits going off the MSRP, $450 for the Gigabyte versus $280 for the MSI. The sale price for both reduces that margin to 44%, which is better, but it's definitely still on the high side. The next step up usually has the premium 1440p display sitting around $200 to $220 US, like the MSI G274 QPF-QD and Asus XG27 ACS. This is where I feel the M27Q2 QD is the most competitive. It's better than the G274 QPF-QD in terms of speed and contrast while offering a similar, very wide color gamut, And while it doesn't have a notable speed advantage over the XG27 ACS, it is a higher refresh model with a wider gamut and better contrast. If Gigabyte were to price this monitor more like $260 US, I think they'd run into issues because at that price, you can purchase a proper HDR capable monitor like the AOC Q27 G40 XMN. One of the reasons to get the M27Q2 QD over the M27Q3 is its color experience. So if you were already leaning that way, I think you'd be better off going all out on a true HDR 1152 zone monitor like that AOC model. Here in Australia, the regular retail price of the M27Q2 and Q27 G40 XMN is the same, putting the Gigabyte model in a tough position. Ultimately, I feel like the promotional launch price of $360 Australian or about $220 US is the price ceiling for this display. Were that to become the permanent price, I think Gigabyte will have made a strong case for the M27Q2 because it is a genuinely good product. Anything above that though, there's just too much competition, so be sure to check prices in your region. Anyway, that's it for this review. If you do appreciate the independent testing we do here at Monitors Unboxed, if you find these reviews helpful, then please consider supporting us on Patreon. Links to that is in the description below. If you sign up, you get access to some benefits like our monthly live streams and Discord chat, but also our calibrated settings and ICC profiles that we create during these reviews. Also, if you do want to purchase one of the monitors that we talked about during this review, so if you found it helpful in that sense, we have links for that in the description as well. So anyway, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.